Okay, so hello. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for those who returned after my first botched attempt last Thursday. And less said about that, the better. My plan this evening is to offer a means to reflect on how we might alter our patterns of thinking and our method of practice as we tackle a global pandemic. Sort of setting the bar quite high, I guess. It's massively complicated. And no 1 hour lecture by a bearded bloke in Zoom is going to offer a simple set of solutions. Accordingly, I'm not going to attempt to do this. My aim is merely to set your trains of thought in a certain direction. I've coined it how to collaborate during crisis, but we might add on other matters because it's a bit of a rambling monologue, which is in effect my thoughts compiled through several weeks of discussion and debate with my family, friends, colleagues, collaborators, and many contemporaries, then threaded together to seek some sense and, more importantly, to help us forge a new direction and a new method. We'll call it the reboot. I hope the value I bring to this discussion as a practitioner and not an academic or researcher is appreciated and valued. What I'm aiming to do is to voice the experience of living and practicing through the pandemic. This is intended to be a genuine gesture of sharing experience, and as a consequence, hopefully, to sharing learning. It's most likely that every member of the audience here this evening has congruent feelings, thoughts and fears, and this is not something any individual will own. It's a collective experience on a global scale. As a consequence, I'm not here to talk about form making and architectural techniques for resilience and density. I'm here to talk about relationships. I'm here to talk to some degree about the importance of autonomy through greater awareness of the team and the players, about the dangers of micromanagement, the problem of design creep, isolation, and how we need to go to the next step and build on the values of trust as a means of transforming our businesses and the people who work within them, and the work we produce in the face of health and climate crises. Everybody hearing this okay? Thumbs up? Are we good? Good, good. I can see there are many people affecting and reflecting the same, seeking to explain their thinking of the new normal and questioning what workplaces of the future might look like. How remote are practices and offices and spaces likely to become? And what benefits and pitfalls emerge whilst we become digitally linked but geographically distant, something that Piers was talking about last week, Piers Taylor. This presentation will last approximately 30 or so minutes, assuming we don't have another catastrophic technical blunder, with no slides, just me standing here raw and unplugged. I also hope this is a precursor to a discussion, either through open channels of thought and dialogue here in this Zoom meeting, or through the usual social media channels, or if you've been really motivated, and there might be one or two of you amongst there, and have more details to share, then contact me by email on the following email, which is joevelomo@gmail.com. That's Joe, Joevelomo @gmail.com. Firstly, it's worth acknowledging on your behalf that I'm speaking from my office. I've had to visit here regularly since we went into the current enforced social distancing regime. The office, and in fact the entire building, is deserted, along with all the office buildings in the street we are located in, apart from me and Ellie and Jack, who are here this evening. I've timed my daily exercise routine over this last 6 or 7 weeks to attend the building and to carry out a new evolved pattern of working activities which are a direct consequence of the lockdown. Namely, I am now security guard, troubleshooter and IT support, office and maintenance manager, plant waterer and cleaner, alongside my pre-COVID values and duties. The need to visit the office has created an utterly unique opportunity for reflection through its distance, its difference and its emptiness. It's an eerie place, quite still and quite silent, and has heightened the sense of the exceptional nature of these circumstances. It takes me back to the first day I launched practice in 2004, where one had to do everything. Although, of course, now it's quite different. In that the office has 50 team members in London and a satellite office of 3 or 4 in Copenhagen, and a complex network of exceptionally gifted people and a raft of complex projects at a variety of stages across the UK. At this point, a warm hand of gratitude to the Architecture Foundation, and let's just see some claps in the boxes, please. Claps for Architecture Foundation, there you go. And the 100-day studio program. And also a round of applause for Ellis and Rosie, who are in some of the boxes, top left in mine, and their team. What I've seen has been truly absorbing and remarkable. Had we not been plunged into the crisis, we might not have realised this opportunity in quite the same way. I'd like to plug 3 of the lectures before I go on. First, Richard Sennett's piece on density and cities, leading to Caroline Steele's exploration of our new publication, Citopia, and then on to the extraordinary presentation by Jeremy Till. Each of these 3 lectures drawing out an obvious theme in which we make direct associations between our prior selves, call this our pre-COVID selves, and the failing of our societal systems. The arguments and insight in each are compelling, and to a certain degree should not really come as a surprise to any half-intelligent adult. What I wanted to do was to reflect on the situation from within practice. The practice I represent is one of many thousands of creative businesses whose methodologies have been directly tipped out on the floor in pieces. I hope we will come to realise that this isn't necessarily all bad. And as a consequence, I'm one of many hundreds of thousands whose lives are now in a decentralised and destabilised iterative state between our pre-COVID selves and a future unknown horizon. So let's dwell upon what happened up until now, so very briefly. And again, this is a sort of little description of what happened to us. The practice, as with most of others, I'm sure, was awash with speculation in January, early January, increasing to fever pitch when the first cases of the virus landed on European shores. Even then, perhaps, our conditioning guided our subjective selves to seek distance from anything associated with the looming crisis and assumed it would not affect us and that things would continue roughly as they were. What emerged was that we were simply holding our nerve against an inevitable lockdown and, as a consequence, the closure of all offices, creative or not, for an undetermined period of time. We, as did most of you I'm sure, planned our way through the crisis speculating on what might happen through debate, research, and imagination. With the question being, how would we ever survive? But surviving we are. We've proven without doubt that when we act collectively, we can survive crisis. Well, certainly we can survive the upward curve of the crisis through resilience, endurance, wit, adaptability, and so forth. But can we survive the downward curve? The timing of the lockdown was partly unexpected and, of course, almost immediate. The entire team at Morrison Company put incredible effort into setting up 50 mini practices overnight, something like a war effort. We rallied around, carrying out a full and detailed analysis of software licenses, hardware capacity, network and broadband capabilities, spatial complexities in each house, and so forth, simultaneously. Big shout out to Rose and Judith and the team. Feverishly deployment of taxis, bikes, couriers, and so forth. And of course, people fleeing London. And then the next day, silence. The office empty. Tumbleweed in the aisle where once there was chatter and energy. And in the eye of the crisis storm, we are now a fully distributed network. Each week is a different process of settling in. Each week feels more like a month given the ground we make up, and it often feels like we're in a new century. And of course, our team and your teams have set up support networks of social gatherings, yoga groups twice weekly, CPD and practice seminars, Friday night cultural exchanges, and so forth, all instantly played through the digital format. A sort of defiant, we will still keep going as we did before mentality. But if you say it's business as usual, you're lying. Or at least you're doing your very best to spin conceit and convince all around you that everything is cool. But there are questions. Is work really sustainable when we're remote most of the time? How do I manage my team? How do I stay motivated? How do I deliver an exemplary service against such constraints? And other questions such as, why do we even have an office? And so we curiously began exploring the idea of a new no office normal. The shift is seismic, daunting and unrelenting, and more so, there is little government-to-government consistency and an abundance of misinformation and vagueness to explain how things would return to normal. Return to normal, I hear you ask. Why do we want to return to normal? Interestingly, it seems to have been an age since we last met our teammates face to face, but actually it's just a matter of weeks. And there is no absolute fixed date set out for the wholesale return to office working. So this may likely extend the current working structure for many more weeks, if not months to come, or even indefinitely. So back to practice. During the upward curve of crisis, what many practices, including ourselves, have largely achieved is to bring many of the bad habits from our pre-COVID working methods into the digital sphere. And these habits are somehow heightened by the pressure this exerts on people's lives and people's homes. The idea of being present to evidence your input, the idea to kind of expect instant responses, and still drawing tens of people into unnecessary meetings and so forth. But what we need to hope for is that this is just one iteration in an evolution of our businesses to a more asynchronous form of communication, one where we don't all have to be in the same room or online at the same time, and that you work when you are most effective, enabling each individual's own flow or self-management and productivity. In effect, we are all unwittingly engaged in the biggest social experiment in human history, and the experiment involves all of us in real time with actual effect experienced daily. To put this into some perspective, it seems there are a few companies which do the distributed and asynchronous working methodology better than Automatique, which is the company behind WordPress, which powers 35% of all websites on the internet, founded by Matt Mullenweg. Automatique, at the time of writing, has 1,170 employees scattered across 75 countries, speaking 93 languages. More relevantly, the company does not have an office, with its employees collaborating almost exclusively online. His view is that there is a 5-level shift to a fully distributed working method, where level 1 is pre-COVID, which is all of us, and level 2, which is resulting in the recreation of the online office, which is where you'll find all of us currently situated, to where Automatique is, which is level 4. Level 5 is coined Nirvana, and this is where your distributed team works better than any in-person team ever could, and we are all clearly a long way off from that. So whilst we gainfully stumble onwards, trying to piece this all together, there are many positives we might want to acknowledge. The democratization of space, where your clients, colleagues, and collaborators of whatever age and rank, all sit in the same pixelated frame in full view of bookshelves, clothes, and the domestic realm. Indeed, the opt-in and opt-out ability of Teams and Zoom enables every team member to control their interface with the meeting. But whilst this is positive, there are obvious negative issues we also now encounter. The most important one to dwell upon is the space standards of poorly designed and ill-equipped housing, which has pushed a breaking point when homes in multiple occupancy become several co-working enterprises jostling for the same physical, visual, audioscape simultaneously. This places untold stresses on personal relationships, and that's before you throw children into the mix. So whilst we can identify many immediate positives, such as more time with the family, more time to control the environment you work in, less travel, easier to access green spaces and so forth, there are problems of compatibility, of network strength, of poor spatial layout, of non-adaptive housing stock, and of course the pervasive nature of the office still ever creeping into your home. So with this experience, might this mean we take a newly refreshed look at the office? The big question, I guess, is having an office important, and why? From my perspective, and possibly many amongst you, the office is the physical embodiment of the culture of your practice. It is a space which fosters interaction, casual encounters, friendships, the unexpected. It is immersive, full of energy. It is stimulating, fun, and a manifestation of shared endeavour. It talks of togetherness and encouragement, and of course the physical aspect of social encounters. So when we think of the value of the office, are we talking about the hardware, the building and infrastructure, or the software, the people and culture? But more so, when might we have dared ask the question of the importance of office if we had not succumbed to the pandemic? So to counter the positives of the office, let's take another look from a different perspective. The modern day office is a natural evolution of the industrial factory model of productivity and output. It imposes a fixed timetable. It necessitates physical presence to evidence your contribution. Its design and layout is more often than not governed by an uninspiring straitjacket of rules and conventions. Your active self in this environment is often crushed into a 1.4 by 1 meter white laminate desk, poorly lit, cold in winter and baking in summer. You cannot necessarily choose the person who sits next to you, and above all, it represents significant wasted energy, wasted space, and wasted costs. With these incredibly constraining influences, and with a balance sheet to meet each month involving our base overheads and costs, we are driven onwards task to task, program gateway to program gateway as we feed the machine. But this means we simply do not have sufficient capacity to make any time for anything else. Time is an incredibly valuable commodity, and everything is a factor of scheduling and programming, which the bad habits of our pre-COVID selves conspire to take from you, even in a dispersed workflow. But we should recognize that we stand at this time in a once-in-a-generation moment to redress the issue of time and space. Now is the chance to row upstream and to consider radical but achievable changes to the way we function. And the obvious first radical thing to do is to carve out time for reflection. A continuous, productive time to elevate the value of reflection to the same value as production, where mindfulness, wellness, positive thinking, and creativity can flourish. So by carving out some time, I've reflected on my own personal objectives in practice and what I might seek for those whom I collaborate with. Amongst a myriad of obvious things, a continuous theme which emerges is a desire to create an environment in which people have agency and space to challenge the normative of practice output, a sort of magic lens empowering people to see things differently, however radical or not, forcing us to stop what we're doing and to look at it, re-look at it, and look at it again, and reflect. I suggest it's not always about answers. Often it comes down to whether you're asking the right question. So the challenge here is to create the right environment to enable us, all of us and our collaborators, to reflect on something else offering this alternative view. Now, the immersive office may be one such lens. Not all of them, not the only one, but one of them. And I'll explain why. As you can see from where I'm standing, the physical incarnation of an idea holds magnificent and potent value for both those engaged in a creative activity and equally true for those who might glimpse the creative activity in passing. I see the model as one such lens to reflect on practice and for us to reflect on the dilemma that we are presented with. That struggle, that tension between the analog and the digital, between the thing machined and the thing handcrafted, between the virtual and the physical. So perhaps we might think, with this cap of dilemma on, about models in a different way. To me, they are sounds, smells, shapes, shadows. They are ambiguous, specific, obvious, curious, unsettling, inspiring, durable, fragile, fleeting, treasured, trashed, recycled, reused, stored, displayed, lost, hidden, formal, sketchy, good, bad, and terrible. They are singular, and they are sequences. They are also more than just themselves. They are reflection. They are experiment, innovation, representation, abstraction, communication, question, answer, success, failure. They are the scale of themselves and the scale of something other. This is their physical value. The model is also intelligence, culture, endeavor, and skill. The result of the hands and the minds of those who have invested time in them. They are the people. They are staff, past and present, evidence of scalpel cuts, blood lost, sweat and tears. And when collected, the model becomes models. They become a collection, a body of thought, with an immersive quality of immense value when experienced in the flesh, as it were. As a spectacle, such a collection embodies the cultural presence and essence of practice. Perhaps some of you have noticed that I've been posting on Instagram and Facebook for the last 5 days leading up to today's lecture, a panoramic view which captures the continuous output of the practice through this one medium, being the model. And to be clear, what you're looking at here is somewhere in the region of 300 or so models, with at least the same number again in racks, so here and here, either side of the camera, and a further more in the model shop here and next door, and distributed downstairs. We have another 2 stories of models made. So the Architecture Foundation, I think, posted today that this is all about models. This is like 20% of it. It took several days for me to carry each of these models up into position for this talk. That's how much I'm invested in the Architecture Foundation, guys, giving it for free. And this process of assemblage became both thought-provoking and highly emotional. We have models of varying scales, of varying formats, utilizing many different materials, some concept, some others compositional, many site strategy, massing, and scale focus. And of course, we have many models which explore fragmentary moments in the design process. These models are not just one hand, but many, many tens of hands, if not hundreds. What is important, I think, is to reflect on why the physical embodiment of our work is important and what this means when we are isolated, in lockdown, or longer term, confined to greater limits on movement and access to our workplaces. I would suggest that in reality, architects do not build buildings. Architects communicate ideas. Architects narrate futures. Architects dwell on pasts and imagine places. Our work is conducted as part of a collective of people, which over the course of many hands, many minds, and of course time, leads to the realization of a built form. This is the true extensive collaboration. It's worth reflecting also that even if the building which is explored in any of the models gets built, many of the ideas explored in the models are never realized, and the ideas that they are represented by never surface beyond the moment they are born into being. In this sense, the model is often the end result of the testing of an idea, and its relationship to the next iteration is the important value. Buildings are never forever, sadly or otherwise, and models perhaps even more fleeting, but in both there is a sense of achievement or learning captured in imperfections, errors, and epiphanies. Whilst it was not a direct influence on putting this installation together, a calling installation, my mind drifts to the model room at the Soane Museum or perhaps the V&A Cast Course. There is a palpable atmosphere in these spaces of something important, something other. And if a photo was enough, or a two-dimensional image was enough, then why are museums like this full of three-dimensional objects? I guess also I'm minded to think of the classic photograph of Bear Photography in 1970 of Dennis Lasden, Philip Wood, and the team captured in black and white in front of a stack of discarded models of the National Theatre, what Lasden described as the scrap heap. There's something in the sense of human achievement, failure, exhaustion, and relief in this image. There is a way, I believe, to imagine oneself in this image through practice. So back to this room. 7 weeks ago, this collection of 16 years worth of work lost most of its value overnight. due to the imposed isolation and distribution of our team to the far-flung corners of London, the UK, Ireland, Spain, and Denmark. And not only that, for the first time in our history, we are distanced. We are remote and abstracted from the source of our work. And this is why we need to think outside of the box to imagine new scenarios in this moment. So on reflection, we must speculate on what might be better around the corner, how the evolution of what went before and what is happening now can lead to a transformational shift in new paradigms. It will be impossible to draw final conclusions at this juncture, but we might be able to find the metrics and remain accountable to them afterwards. One might even provocatively suggest that practice needed a crisis. Returning to collaboration mid-COVID, there are obviously a great many platforms which emulate a shared digital environment. And by and large, they're very good. There are Teams and Zoom alongside old-timers such as WhatsApp and FaceTime, as well as the newer kid on the block, Slack. But I still sense a sort of stagnant dynamic, a passive form of exchange compared to the dynamic exchange or the dynamic exchange in physical real-time space. Excuse my mouth there. More versatile are those platforms in which team members can collaborate in one space in real time, InVision or Microsoft Whiteboard being two. But to my mind, whilst these enable the design process by liberating the time-space continuum, the methodology still feels really very much pre-COVID in new clothes. When done bad, these are the kind of dysfunctional businesses as usual, and one in which we might think of the answer through the hardware rather than actually reflecting on, again, on what the question should be and focusing on the software, again, analogous of people and culture. Collaboration isn't a one-size-all-fits jacket. It's a unisex onesie made of ethically sourced and organic recycled spandex, where arms can be legs and there is no back or front. It's malleable, flexible, and can accommodate all shapes and sizes. This means that collaborating in real space and digital space is different, and that they might contrast and complement each other in equal measure. So how do we build on this? At its simplest, we should be consistent and honest about how people work, how we work with other people, and about how our work is affected under differing circumstances, and then learn to play more to the strengths of those collaborating. And those strengths are more than just how profitable we can become through the actions of those who are collaborating for us, but how much value this adds to those collaborating and consequently to the work we do, collectively and individually. It's worth noting that scientific studies suggest that our preferred sleeping patterns or chronotypes are programmed at birth. People are either night owls or early birds. So the factory model of a clock in and clock out 9 to 5 does not work for us all on the basis of our biology alone. Never mind what life throws in our way, and indeed working to the rhythm of clock is likely harmful to many. Currently, as I look at practice, and I'd urge you all to think carefully in the same way, we are presently weakened in parts and strengthened in others. Our work is clearly compromised if we attempt to apply the same set rules of engagement to this scenario as we did before. This isn't a continuous effervescence of shared learning anymore. Our collective brain isn't functioning in the same way, and the methods are weakened if we try to do business as usual. The business as usual isn't just how we work from our bedrooms, but is also how we view the value of our work and how we value those involved in or affected by our work. I'd like to refer you to the certified B corporations at this moment, which are a new kind of business that balances business purpose and profit. So that's certified B corporations, or B Corp. They are legally required to consider the impact of their decisions on their workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment. This is beyond legislation. Certified B corporations and businesses that meet the highest standards of verified social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability to balance profit and purpose is their purpose. B Corps are accelerating a global cultural shift to redefine success in business and build a more inclusive and sustainable economy by reducing inequality, lowering levels of poverty, making a healthier environment with stronger communities and the creation of more high-quality jobs with dignity and purpose. And this is relevant to architecture. Last week, James Perry, the co-founder of B Corp, posted an article on medium.com. You can find it. With the title, "What will be the new normal? The choice is ours," more poignantly. In the article, he talks eloquently about two character traits which represent two fundamental philosophical positions. On the one hand, the individualist, and on the other hand, the interdependent. To summarize, the individualist focuses on self. The materialistic prioritizes economic output, seeks advantage, sniffs freebies, seeks culprits to blame, and ensures it wins by whatever means. The interdependent is only as strong as the weakest communal link, with fate bound by the fate of others, is bonded for good, does not obsess about personal advantage. These are what works for you, works for me ethics. So in short, individualism seeks to maximize itself, whilst interdependence seeks to maximize the whole. And this is interesting. Perry illustrates that in crisis, it's blindingly obvious. So this is in crisis, it's blindingly obvious that we are interdependent, that the virus itself is a manifestation of our interdependence. It's a social virus, and what happens in Wuhan affects me. So in VO2, when we go back to a rebooted normal, whatever that means, are we individualists, adopting a position of hoarding, seeking to steal a march on our competitors, taking advantage irrespective of who is denied whilst chewing up the planet? Or can we work collectively through reflection by carving time to imagine a new system where winners don't take everything and where we are all very much in this together? In the reboot, we must not return to our pre-COVID selves. Businesses must protect, and when I say businesses, I'm talking practices, must protect the social and planetary system within which it's embedded. And we need to recognize that all businesses are not virtuous. This means we have to resist where possible, turning all the engines back on and throwing open all the switches once again to make up for losses incurred through this crisis. And in the same time we have, whilst we resist, we reflect on the fact that we are part of a complex system, and that a system and our practices should use all of its talent to support the interests of all. Remember 2008? That was the last time we missed the opportunity during the reboot. So let us reflect on a few joys that we've witnessed these last few weeks. The heightened awareness of birdsong, the liberation of streets with fewer cars leading to improving air quality and reduced noise pollution, an increased awareness of the importance of nature and an awareness of the importance of our physical and mental well-being. In essence, we have witnessed a truer value of life during crisis than we might have hoped for before it. And to end, and I apologise if this has been a bit of a rant, a few sound bites of things and reflections for you to take away before we take some questions. Firstly, Jeremy Till, in his piece on architecture after architecture, brilliantly explored the idea of vernacular, not as an aesthetic, but as an idea of collective intelligence shared at a communal table of participation. Boom! There it is, right there. This seems particularly relevant as a way of thinking about how practice and collaboration needs to evolve through a balance of both a dispersed model and a centralized mode of working. This means exploring the idea of interdependence across practice, across discipline, and across borders. Lest we forget, we are all in this together, and what affects you certainly affects others. The idea of working together for a greater value and a greater cause to influence and improve the damaging cultures of our industries seems to me centrally important at this point, and therefore we need to be vigilant. The London Practice Forum, or LPF for short, is a group of 20 to 30 small to medium architect practices set up pre-COVID to seek ways to improve the working experience of each member practice and their teams, to provocate and agitate on matters such as climate, ethics and social values, procurement and exploitation, and within the industry. This sits alongside Architects Declare, now a year on, currently reviewing the impact it has made. Although it must be said that from many third-party perspectives, the Architects Declare mandate is not radical enough, and many of the member practices appear on face of it to be doing exactly the opposite of what they have declared through climate crisis. Might therefore the COVID crisis result in a rebooted call to arms and a firmer sense of accountability for those doing the opposite of what they promise? And finally, our London On collective of 6 participating practices is a further example of the vernacular of collective intelligence shared at a communal table of participation. London On is a rolling research and residency programme in cities around the globe, run by collaborating London-based architecture practices, where resources are pooled, questions posed, and collaborative making and doing, defining the experience to broaden minds and widen a worldview. It is not for profit and self-funded. London On was born out of a rally against another crisis moment in 2016, namely Brexit, and was intended to track the 2-year period following the implementation of Article 50 in March 2017. During the period following, ourselves, Morrison Company, Coffee Architects, Galt Scott, Haptic, May and Turner Works, studied in the field in London, El Ejido near Alhambra in Spain, Milan, Oslo and Paris. And we also exhibited at the Oslo Triennale last year, exploring the themes of degrowth through the lens of a bowl of onion soup. And through COVID and distance, we have met more regularly than at any time beforehand and shared more of our culture than any time beforehand too. This proves a very real value of sharing your experience in practice with others. As indicated by James Perry of B Corp, sharing for communal benefit is better. As per the London Practice Forum, this requires us to drop the barriers, removing the walls between practices and disciplines, be more open, truthful, transparent, and above all, interdependent. And as for London On, we're reaching out this evening as part of the lecture to seek interest from all others outside of the core group of 6, across the scale, location, and discipline, to forge a stronger, broader network of activists, influencers, and creatives, with the sole purpose to seek creative, collaborative solutions for a more planet-centric and ethical method of practice. And I'm finished there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joe. I think, yeah, if we head back over, Ellis got the first question.
Hello, Joe. Thank you so much. It was such a brilliantly constructed and to the point kind of presentation, and kind of hugely clearly, I think, it evident to everyone how much effort had gone into that. I guess I'm struck too about this question of what offices might look like in the future, and I mean, I know already some practices that work in this sort of dispersed way. I think kind of I remember talking to Rolf Kentish of Long and Kentish, maybe about 18 months ago. It already kind of he was basically running a practice that was dispersed in different cities, and the office was effectively on the cloud. There, in that case, a sort of small practice with a number of collaborators who'd worked together for a long period, and they were they had a long-standing working relationship. And I've had conversations in the last month with other architects of running bigger practices who are also thinking about those issues, about whether they should give up the office. I guess one of my concerns about that is, what does it mean for young architects? How do you, as a young practitioner, learn the craft? Because my own experience of being an architect in the distant past was that was absolutely fundamental. Being in an office environment and seeing how to detail and just the daily exposure by osmosis to the craft of architecture. I would struggle to imagine how you could ever pick that up. Working kind of across Zoom. How do you see that kind of duty to educate a new generation? How do you think that could be reconciled with this the very real potentials of this new model?
Yeah, I mean, I think therein lies the dilemma. And I guess that's kind of what the lecture, or sorry, it's not a lecture, it's sort of a little talk was sort of trying to, I guess in some ways, not for me to tell you how to do it, but actually from the audience as well, to give back some sort of personal accounts of where they see their experience sort of changing their perspective on things. You know, and again, I don't have an answer here. You know, we're at the beginning of a journey, trying to work things out. I can see Amanda Bayou in the audience as well, and I had a chat with her yesterday about the very same thing. And I think there are kind of a number of levels that we're trying to sort of grapple here, and it goes back to this idea of the kind of the difference between the analog and the digital, the analog and the kind of virtual, the digital and the crafted, the handmade and the machine. This is the kind of paradox that kind of architects are sort of sitting in. In one hand, how do you kind of continue to sort of bring sort of cultural value to your work? How do you make sure that others understand that value beyond just the sort of design phase, through procurement and delivery and so forth? And then of course, how do you do all the things that you're describing? And I think this is we are as a practice utterly perplexed and vexed by this, and we don't have consistency within the office as well. I think we're all very much talking about what does the workplace of the future look like. So, you know, a more decentralized and distributed system, a work at home digital network, access to green spaces and so on and so forth. But at the same time, this is what I'm trying to say to you, and it kind of genuinely kind of like I'm also struggling with this, is all this. And all this is learning, all this is reference, this is all has massive, potent cultural learning value. And how do you kind of get the two to come together? And I guess what I was thinking about, if again, this is just me thinking out loud, really, unprepared for the question and the answer, is to think about, well, if we think about kind of interdependence, then the interdependence suggests that there are fluctuations and movements of people, and that if everyone has the same capacity and flex within their businesses, then what a new system might look like is where maybe rather than everybody having an offices generally kind of slide across one another, spaces are borrowed, and there's a much more of a sort of sharing physical network as well as a digital one, for example. And that the idea of distributing a kind of network outward, which is just people sitting in their living rooms, perhaps they become more satellite, such as our space in Copenhagen, where we are very much interested in being on the ground, but we're not doing the on the ground with a view that we grow a kind of, you know, exponentially to kind of large scale. We're looking to collaborate on a local level with local practices. So we don't need a big office, but with that model, you get to kind of learn through this sort of serendipity, casual encounter with others. So might there be a scenario where, you know, maybe you choose all of London on, or 6 practices out of the LPF, or whoever it might be. Let's get rid of all of the other offices that we have. Let's play out our leases, and then get into a situation where we have stacked offices, where the boundaries between the territories between offices and this idea of kind of of competitive secrecy is somehow weakened and somehow less obvious, and the boundaries are ripped apart, and businesses flow across one another and become mutually part of a collaborative solution to that very problem, which is in COVID, I'm paying, I don't know what it is, Judith, I don't know if you're here in the audience, but I think we pay something like 100,000 to 200,000 pounds a year, work that out over 12 months, and I've been doing that for 2 months. There's no one in this office. So that's like 30,000 pounds or whatever it goes down the drain for nothing. So imagine what we could do with that 30,000 pounds. And again, it's the sort of lens to look at it. You take the 30,000 pounds, maybe you keep half of it. That becomes investment in research and self-initiated work and collaborative work. I don't know, but I guess that's what I'm thinking, is this idea that I think we have to think beyond the kind of walls of our own business and try to work out where they overlap with others' work.
Interesting.
Also, just to say that, as Joe said, if you have kind of just offerings of your own experience, then just let me know. It doesn't have to be a question. But I have got.
I'd love to hear anyone just sort of give some emotion through the channel. Just tell us what you're thinking, how you're feeling. I mean, in some ways, I realise that I'm just sort of talking away and just ranting, and you might just come to this, well, I know all of this. You know, this is nothing new. But I guess what I want to do is to make sure that what happens is the the discussion doesn't just go away because Boris tells us all to go back to work. I'm trying to kind of keep the spirit of the lockdown alive, because I genuinely feel there's something about being in this state which creates opportunity for us to have that debate and have that engaged dialogue.
Question from Jen Elkanah. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for taking my question. Just like buildings have a design life, do you think your models also do too? I like to think in 100 years they'll be available to view in a museum or a public archive, maybe in some cases outlive the buildings themselves. What's your view on that?
Yeah, very possible. I mean, I kind of touched on this as well, that, you know, as with buildings, there's a sense that, I mean, again, it's a difficult, but in simple terms, the simple answer is, of course, yes, for them to remain in some physical context and people to learn from them makes a lot of sense. And we've talked about the cast courts of the V&A. They are kind of, you know, the Victorians' obsessive need to collect and catalogue and archive, you know, items and learn from that. And that's something that we're still looking at 100, 200 years later and probably beyond. So of course there's value. At the same time, as I say, I think buildings may be part of that as well. And the scale of which we think about the construction of ideas, the maquette, the model, the scale model, kind of through a landscape up to just building, being part of places, it's all part of a sort of scale shift of just sedimenting ideas and learning from them. And I doubt very much that there are many outcomes at whatever scale or whatever position, whether it's a model or building, where you would say it's truly perfect. There are always lessons to learn. There are always anecdotes and epiphanies that people realize within the process. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next question from Tarek Merlin.
Yeah, hi Joe, hi everyone.
Hi Tarek.
You talked a bit about how we might work and how we might have a no studio normal. I was just wondering, and you mentioned that you touched on a little bit about space standards and residential design. So my question is really about how you think all of this in this current context, how it might resonate into the future and impact the way that we design for living and how we might all live together as well as work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical. In some ways, you know, we've been focusing a lot at a kind of practice level on what it means to think about how we work in the future. But the issue that COVID raises, in a beautiful bit of poetry in a way, is that in an isolated and distributed network, your house is your office. And the two things suddenly become the same problem. And the problems are always about flexibility, spatial layouts, orientation, all the usual environmental issues, adaptability and durability. And obviously, at the moment, I don't think there are many parts of any real sort of advisory documents which really kind of drive that as a sort of essence of how you think about housing. Sorry, I've been told to look at the camera. Yeah, I think we at practice level, that's something that we're very much interested in exploring. And again, I'm reaching out to everyone here. This is a sort of start of a potential coming together of people. Again, I reiterate, both our practice and London On, if you have ideas about this, then we're here to listen. We're here to kind of collaborate. And the one thing that we're doing, Miranda, who's in the audience, and hopefully many other members of the practice, and Polly, they've been working, trying to drive new policy in how you deal with homelessness, temporary housing, and so forth. And if you drive it, and if you make sense, and if you pull something together in a coherent manner, then those that write the policy are there to listen, and they will listen. So what stops us as the collective working out how to put together all of the issues involved in housing and working and life-work balance and distance and travel and timeframes? Let's write the policy. Let's be at that. Let's be at the kind of the coalface, writing the policy and advising at a creative level how to resolve these issues.
Yeah.
We have a question from Faizan Kazi, but she doesn't have her mic on, so I'm just going to ask it. What do you think about construction workers and their kind of experience in this pandemic? And how do you tackle their problems when they're the ones that are making our designs real, or the architects real?
God, that is so, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that as well. I mean, again, for everyone, you know, we live in Hackney. I live on a main road, and we've been watching London somehow take it upon itself in an organic way to tackle its own version, or to kind of address its own version, or to react to its own version of how to deal with the crisis. That's one level. And then you have a governmental level, which is basically driven purely by an economy which at its very core is the construction industry. Without the construction industry, and we're all kind of facing a kind of massive problem very, very soon, whereby the economy grinds to a halt. I think we're at the lowest level for over a decade in terms of its kind of its financial and economic value. So everyone in this room, which there are 279 now, but there were over 300 at one moment. All of these people in this room are going to be part of the extreme outcome of a squeezed economy. And I guarantee you, as with the workers that are on site, distributors, fabricators, people working and thinking through kind of problems, you're all going to be basically pushed super, super hard, really, really quick. You're going to be in sixth gear to drive the economy to build. And that's what I'm saying is how can we possibly collectively find the space and the time to sort of push back and to resist it as much as we can, to influence the people that effectively make those decisions, because the train is coming, and it's coming big, and we're going to be swept away again. And there's nothing that we, you know, unless we somehow rally together and sort of talk about it and evidence its importance, then we're going to be swept away. As far as the workers are concerned, you know, there's building sites opposite where I live. I've been seeing people day to day, not socially distancing. We have deliveries every day, so it's across the board. People aren't able to function in a way which responds wholeheartedly to the recommendations of the crisis. So what are you all going to do? What's anybody going to do? How do you, I mean, again, you know, maybe it's back to the Architecture Foundation. Perhaps the Architecture Foundation can never host another actual lecture event or an exhibition, physical exhibition, that everything that we view is digital. What would that look like? Is that possible? How do you feel that would go down? What do you think, Ellis?
About it. Ellis?
But I guess the question is, you know, is it purely a loss? Is everything a loss, or is there a moment in which we can think kind of outside the constraints of that box, which is an obvious constraint? Everything looks bad. If you take the thing that Ace was talking about, where everything we had before was good, you say, well, no, it's not bad. It's not consistent either way. There is somewhere between the two, elements of the two, which need to be brought together to make. And so it might be about just, you know, you can imagine a whole series of exhibitions and lectures whereby it's a sort of whole different rhythm and time and spatial experience that you've never had before, that manages still to deliver messaging. I don't know. What do you think of this?
Yeah, am I on? I'd say, yeah, absolutely. It's exactly the conundrum we're dealing with at the moment. And if there are people out there who've been attending these talks, we'd really like to hear your thoughts about what the AF might look like after the 100-day studio. And I'd say, you know, the big discovery for me about, you know, in the last month of doing these events is that in many respects, they feel better than going to a talk in real space. Yeah, they feel democratic. We have an audience suddenly which is global. We have parents coming, you know, able to kind of reconcile coming to a talk with, you know, childcare issues. I think even, you know, what we're seeing now, the Q&A is perhaps better moderated, doing it this way than you might get online. In real space. We don't have the carbon footprint issues of bringing someone from the other side of the world to come talk to a room of 100 people. Of course. But I guess
the thing which is missing, and again, it's one of those things where perhaps we just have to accept that this is the new reality, is, again, it goes back to what your question in the beginning was, Ellis, about you don't have the possibility for the kind of chance encounter waiting in line for the toilet or kind of buying a bottle of, snake bite. That's all gone. And in those moments, they were amazing. And that's, so it's a different rhythm, isn't it? It's a different reality.
Yeah, for me, the most important thing about the live events has always been that people get to go to the pub afterwards.
Yeah.
They might meet a husband or wife, or they might kind of, form a practice, or, it's that bringing together aspect which has always been sort of fundamental to what the AF does. And, so we're very actively struggling with what that might mean, because this is clearly going to be...
You should have a kind of answers on a kind of digital postcard session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should have at some point in this process, we should have a conversation, specifically on, what the program might look like after the end of August.
Yeah.
I guess we're thinking about how, what makes doing something in the physical space worthwhile, like what those conditions are that we want to achieve, I guess.
Well, I guess the thing is, it's like, what do? I sort of, I can pick this up, and I can smell it, and I can taste it, and I can turn it around, and I can play with it, and none of you can. And that's the sort of thing. It's like it's that interaction. That's the thing, is that if everything that we do is conducted through a digital interface, which is what we see, then I think we're worse for it. And I think you've got to try and find that balance where the two somehow can coexist safely, whereby we work out how to ensure that there's a sort of safe means to conduct physical interaction. And I don't know what it is, but I think if we simply just go to an extreme where everything is now digitized because we can do it, we lose this. We lose the fact that there's dust on this model and I can clean it. It's sort of that thing. It's that kind of tangible manifestation of something physical, which is profound.
I'm just going to take the last question, which I think is a really kind of resonant one, from Erin. Erin, you're unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have my video on. I just wanted to add in the conversation about privilege and saying that a studio office space acts as a leveling factor for those who come from poor backgrounds. So how could someone without the facilities to create, design and interact digitally at home be included in a no office normal? Would privilege be exacerbated in terms of career development? Those who can work better at home, if they have more space, better light levels, all of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, there's kind of, I suppose there are multiple strands to the question. On one level, as we were saying, there's something about the way that people work, and if you're forced to come to office and sort of clock in at a certain time and clock out at a certain time, that's sort of prohibitive, constraining, physically and emotionally harming methodology to work. It's not positive for everybody. Others thrive. And then there's the kind of other flip of the side of the coin where people thrive on working at home. And added to both of those is the sort of, what is the environment within which you're working? So, if you don't like working from home, but you have to work in the office, but the office is shit, then how does that play out? And if you do the other way back, where you like working from home, but actually you don't have any space, how does that play out? So absolutely. So I guess the question back to you, Erin, is should there be a set of rules? Should we be defined by a set of guidance in which organizations and companies which place their staff into remote working build in the infrastructure and spend and invest time in people's houses, for example? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think that home life is, in lots of cases, quite private, and I don't know. I think that there would be difficulties involving the work and the home, particularly if it's not just that you're from a poor background. If it's a short-term period of poverty, or you've fallen on hard times or something, I wonder how much people would want their workplace to be involved with that.
Yeah, no, I can see that's a really interesting point. I mean, I don't have the answer to be honest with you, but yeah, that's good. It's good to throw in the pot of difficult things.
Joe, do you want to say a few words to wrap up, or should we?
I mean, I can do. I'm aware that perhaps this wasn't a kind of standard issue architecture foundation piece. I realised that Tony Fratton is the kind of headline, and he talks about architecture and form and composition and how windows and doors sit together. But I genuinely hope that it was good to have me in your living rooms and in your private spaces, in your homes, because as I say, I'm one of 50 odd people in practice, and all their families and the people that they work with generally trying to work this out. And we genuinely see this as a significant opportunity. It's like this won't come along again while we're alive, to really challenge and potentially shape and change the direction, even if it's infinitesimally small. On a community level, that could be quite a big thing. So I just urge you all to try to find the moment to reflect and influence those around you. And again, once again, my email, I'd love you if you all decided to email me and you wanted to reach out and you wanted to have a further conversation. I'm going to write it down, vlomo@gmail.com. Sort of, I don't know whether you can see that. joevelomo@gmail.com. I'm super excited to continue to have a debate with you. And as I say, London On is now thinking about opening up its doors and broadening its network. And I think Amanda nailed it. I don't know if she's still here. Yeah, she's still there. Amanda nailed it yesterday. Architects need to think creatively about how we design our way out of this problem. And therefore, I'm here to be part of that solution.